All right, so last time we discussed the role of client and server scripting, and talked, probably spent more time on the role of client-side scripting because that's where we're starting out this course. And the main idea with client-side scripting is that it alters a page that has already been loaded. It is loaded along with the page, in other words, along with the HTML and along with the CSS. The JavaScript is loaded initially, and then it can be used to alter the page in some way. And again, we gave sort of some classic examples. The mouse over example, the classic clicking through a slideshow, another example. And in all these cases, this happens without going back to the server. That's the key point. All right. These alteration of the page happens without going back to the server, which again, with today's fast internet connections, it might be less obvious as it was back in the old days, with the 9600 baud modem when you're trying these things. But without having to go back to the server, it can happen virtually instantaneously. So notice how if we reload the page, again, there's a little hitch. You can see it reloading, whereas with this happens immediately. All right, there's sort of a recipe of how most client-side scripting works. And I'm saying most, not all. A lot of times I'll say all. I don't really mean all. So if I ever say all in a class, just know that that means like mostly all. But mostly all client-side scripting works by following this recipe. An event occurs. Now, a lot of times by events, we mean user actions. Such as a mouse over, click, being probably two of the most common ones. Key press would be a third. Most of the, that's many of the actions. But it doesn't have to be. There can also be some a little bit vaguer methods. Like, for example, I don't know, I'll call this vaguer events. Page finishes loading. That's another example of an event. Or timer event occurs. So you could write code to go and do something every certain number of seconds or whatever. But all these things are events. So something happens to get the ball rolling, to trigger things. All right. And how are events communicated? Well, they're communicated in two main ways. The first way, the most simplistic way, is by putting them as attributes of an HTML tag. So I'm going to show the example that we gave last semester in CISS232, and we're going to build on it. Let's go to this one. All right. Mouse on, mouse off. There's events occurring. The first event is I put my mouse over this particular section of code. Second event is I take my mouse off of it. Likewise here and here. And those are represented by on events. As we can see here, that paragraph, we have on mouse over and on mouse out. That describes the two events that we're interested in this example. And these are attributes in the HTML tag that the user is going to interact with. So we have a paragraph, we specify on mouse over, we're going to do something. When the mouse goes out, we're going to do something. And likewise with this example here. So that's the first sort of piece of the puzzle, is the user events. And they're usually the on something. Is an attribute of the relevant HTML tag. Now we're going to learn later on a second way. And the second way is to actually use JavaScript itself to assign an event to a particular HTML element. That's actually the better way to do it. It enforces a greater separation between your HTML and JavaScript. Remember that when we're coding, one thing we like to do is we like to have things cleanly separated. So you don't use inline CSS very often, right? You can put CSS right on an HTML tag by just saying style equals and have some CSS rule. But we don't do that very often because that entangles the HTML and the CSS. And you lose a lot of the advantages of CSS if you do it that way. Sort of the same idea with this, but bear with me for the first few weeks of the class because this is how we'll do events, because it's the simplest, most straightforward way. So there's other ways for us to capture events and to do execute some code. Second thing is the DOM. DOM stands for Document Object Model. And the Document Object Model allows us to address any attributes of an HTML element, including CSS stuff. So we have one statement that early on at least is going to be a workhorse here. And that is document get element by ID. Because this allows our code to point to anything on the page by using its ID. And again, it's important that be lowercase. That's why I corrected it. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller so it fits all on one line. This is a way to refer to any element on the page and to do something specific to it. With each item after the period, we're narrowing down what we want to address, what we want to do something with. Document simply means something on the web page. Get element by ID points to a specific ID within the page. And then we can go further. We can say something like style and then refer to something about the style. And then we can say style.display and refer something about the display attribute of the style of that particular element. So we use that in my simple example here. Document means somewhere on the page. We're interested in something on the page. Get element by ID spoiler 1 means find a thing on the page that has an ID of spoiler 1. That's this thing here. What do we want to change about it? We want to change its style. What about the style do we want to change? We want to just change the display property. And we want to change that to block. That will make this element visible, because if you notice, these paragraphs that have a class of spoiler are initially set to have a display of none. So we don't see them initially. When we put our mouse over this paragraph, though, this executes. We find the thing on the page that has an ID of spoiler 1. We change its style, specifically the display attribute, and we change it to block. All right. On mouse out is virtually the same. The only difference being is on our mouse out, we set the display to none. So we're going to use the DOM to, first of all, find an element and then address any attributes of the HTML element, including CSS stuff. All right. And thirdly, we have the JavaScript language itself. JavaScript is a more full-fledged programming language compared to HTML. HTML, I really wouldn't qualify it as a programming language because it doesn't have the structures that a programming language has. Typically, programming languages have mathematical functions. They have conditional statements where sometimes you do this, sometimes you do that. You have loops where sometimes you repeat a set of statements a certain number of times, and so on. Well, you don't get any of that in HTML, but in JavaScript you do, right? And we're going to be learning the rules of JavaScript. And the good news is for those of you that have taken Java or C#, the syntax in JavaScript is very similar to the syntax in those languages. The main learning curve is learning the DOM and how that works. Now, a few words about JavaScript before we continue our investigation. JavaScript is not Java, okay? It's like Java. It's a scripting language that's like Java. So I hear a lot of times people talk about, I'm going to add Java to my page. Well, you're probably adding JavaScript if you're using it for client-side scripting. All right. Second thing is HTML is very forgiving. In other words, if I make a tag in HTML, if I put a paragraph tag in HTML, I could use a lowercase p or an uppercase p, and it's going to work. What's more, if I forget an ending tag, sometimes it's going to work. All right, sometimes you won't even notice that there's a problem if you forget an ending tag. JavaScript, however, is unforgiving. All right, JavaScript is unforgiving, which means that like other programming languages, a small mistake can stop your code from executing at all. So we have things like typos, or if you spell a word wrong. And remember, JavaScript is case sensitive. So if I go into this code, for example, and in a forgetful moment, I make on mouse over document with an uppercase D, then if we reload that page, all of a sudden that doesn't work. Right? Now, what do you do when something doesn't work? You don't simply stare at the code. That's an approach that many programmers, including myself, sometimes takes, but that's usually probably not the best approach. You use the tools that you have at your hand to investigate the problem. And the first thing that you want to do is look at the JavaScript console. And on Google Chrome, it will be under More Tools, Developers Tools, or Console. And I don't know how well you can see this. It says uncaught type error, document get element by ID is not a function. It would be nice if it told you, hey, you shouldn't capitalize the D, but it gives you these error messages, which, is the best it can do, the best that the browser can do. Because you could have something called document with an uppercase D, you just don't, right? You could have made your own object with called document with an uppercase D. So it doesn't know if you forgot to make that object or if you simply misspelled. So it's going to just the facts. It's going to just give a very clinical description of what it found. And all it knows is that that's not a function. At that point, at least you have something to stare at. Line 17 in this page has the error. I can go to line 17. And interesting, it's actually not on line 17, it's on line 16. So take those line numbers with a grain of salt. A lot of times they point around to where you have the problem, not to the exact location that you have the problem. You fix that, you're back in business. If I try to point to something that isn't there, let's say I just try to point to spoiler instead of spoiler 1. It's also not going to work. We're going to get a different error message. Cannot read properties of null. All right. What does that mean? Well, it means that the object that you're pointing to doesn't exist. So this object doesn't exist. So it's null. All right. It was not able, this function was not able to find something on the page called spoiler because it's called spoiler 1. And therefore it can't change the style. These error messages at first seem pretty cryptic. After you make dozens of errors, you'll be able to recognize them pretty easily. Now, if you look at this page, again, this was just meant for an introduction to JavaScript that I do in my Introduction to Web Development class. But if you look at this, notice something that ought to catch your attention. And that is I have virtually the same code here. Only difference between these lines of code and these lines of code is a specific ID that we're looking for. In one case, we're looking for spoiler 1. In the other case, we're looking for spoiler 2. That ought to catch your attention, right? A common adage for programmers is, and I'll make this real big, DRY. Which stands for do not repeat yourself. All right. What does that mean? That means when you see code that looks the same or virtually the same, that's a sign that maybe you could write it better. Maybe you could do a better job writing it. And what does it matter if your code works? What does it matter that you try to improve it and make it better? Well, it matters for a lot of reasons. It matters because changing the code then becomes easier. All right. We're going to look at what we did to fix this, and that involves creating a function. Right? Creating a function to hide and show the spoilers. And if we have a function, that's code that we can reuse. And if you have code that you can reuse, you can call that code over and over and over again without having any difficulty. Like, for example, let's say I wanted 100 spoilers on this page. There would be an awful lot of changes to the code. I would have to copy this code for every one of the spoilers on the page. Well, guess what? When you copy, there's a chance that you paste it wrong. There's a chance that you forget to change the spoiler number, that you make a typo, whatever. Whereas if there's less code that you have to copy, the better off you're going to be. So let's look at the little more new and improved example here. All right, in this case, we have 3 spoilers, and we've increased the functionality. We have 3 buttons and on the first spoiler and 2 buttons on each of them. We have a show spoiler button and a hide spoiler button. What's more, we have a toggle spoiler. What do I mean by toggle? I mean, if it's off, it's going to make it on. So if it's invisible, it's going to make it visible. If it's already visible, it's going to make it invisible. So we can go back and forth by clicking that. And we have the same thing for these other spoilers. If we click a button twice, nothing bad happens. It's already showing and it keeps showing it. If we click hide spoiler, though, it will hide it. So let's look at this code. By the way, in this class and in many of my classes other than the class that uses Visual Studio, I suggest using Visual Studio Code. It's a nice editor that you can use creating your code. It gives you some kind of intelligent sense. Like, so for example, as I'm typing, if I type in document dot, it shows me all the functions available for that. So I would suggest at least checking it out. All right, what do we have here? We have buttons. But instead of having the JavaScript code built right in to this HTML tag, we're calling a JavaScript function. Already that makes the code cleaner. If you compare the code of the first example, where we have all this in there, the code of this example, the second example is much more concise, which is a good reason for using functions. It cleans up your code. Second thing is functions are reusable. We can call the function from any number of places, and it will do its thing. All right. How do we define a function? We define a function by putting a script tag in here. Later on, we'll talk about putting these in their own script file, but right now we're going to keep it as part of the HTML document. Enclosed in a script file that tells the browser that you're no longer in HTML land, that you're in JavaScript land. Word function, the name of the function, any arguments that you have for the function, then you have your statements. Function itself, the code for the function itself is enclosed in these curly braces. So we use that in JavaScript just as we used it in C# or Java to group things together. And again, nice thing is if we forget one of these, notice that gets red. That indicates something is wrong with that. And so we can find out that we're not having matching braces, so we can change it. Okay. So what do I mean by an argument? If you think back to when you first learned Excel, all right, there are functions that you can use in Excel. You know, there's some functions where you can add up a group of cells. There's an average function that you can get the average of a group of cells. There's a square root function where you can get the square root of a cell. There's like a mortgage payment, a payment calculator where you can say how much you borrow and you know what the percent interest rate is and what's the period of time that the loan is for. All right. If you think about that, in Excel, you couldn't just say calculate the average, right? Because you need to say calculate the average of what? And then you need to supply what you want to calculate the average of. Just like I can't say calculate the mortgage payment. Well, what are the terms of the mortgage? How long is the mortgage? What's the percent interest? What was the amount borrowed? What was the down payment? You know, arguments are additional information that allows a calculation to do its thing, to do what it is set out to do. So in this case, we have a function called showSpoiler. That function's job is to take a spoiler, take an ID of a spoiler, and show it. All right. But we couldn't just say here, show spoiler, because which one of these spoilers would we want to show? We haven't identified what we want to show. Therefore, we need to give this function an argument to specify what it is we want to show. So that is given when we run the function. The function is written generically. The function can show or hide any spoiler that you want as long as you give the proper ID for it. So here we have enclosed in quotes the word spoiler 1. When you have something enclosed in quotes like that, it's called a literal. In other words, we literally want that ID. We don't have a variable that the ID is contained in. We literally want to show that ID as it is. Now notice that in this example, we use two different kinds of quotes. All right. We have the double quotes to go around JavaScript statement, call to the function. We have the single quotes to go around the ID. That is necessary because if we use a double quote here, the browser would think that this is the entire JavaScript statement. This is incorrect. So we have to use two different kinds of quotes, in other words, to make this work. So when we call this function, all right, we say show spoiler. That means that this code is going to execute. And what's more, we've given an argument of spoiler 1. That means that spoiler 1, the letters, the word spoiler 1 is going to be put into this variable. And if you have more than one argument, it's based on position. The first variable that you pass goes into the first argument, second goes into the second, and so on. But spoiler 1 goes into this variable, ID spoiler. And then we say document get element by ID, style display block, document get element by ID, spoiler style color blue. I just threw that in just to show that you can do more than one thing in a function. Now notice that ID spoiler is not enclosed in quotes. The reason for that is not a literal. In other words, we don't want to change the thing that has an ID of ID spoiler. We want to change the thing that is in the contents of the argument or variable ID spoiler, which we define when we call the function. Two things with a function. There's declaring it, where we say, what does it mean when we say show spoiler? And we put the code in. And then when we call it. And when we call it, we give the arguments that are necessary to do the job. Now we have the same thing with hide spoiler. Toggle spoiler is a little more involved because we want to show it if it's hidden and hide it if it's showing. And we can do it this way. We test to see if we have a conditional statement, works the same as in C#. We evaluate this condition. If it's true, we do this. If it's false, we do this. So if the display for that ID that we're looking at is none, or the display is an empty string, that means in either of these two cases, that means that it's not being showed. We show it. Otherwise, the opposite must be true. It must be showing, in which case we hide it. These two vertical lines, sometimes called pipes, indicate an OR function. An OR function means if one of these two conditions is true. Notice the use of the double equal sign. A double equal sign is used for a comparison. In other words, this line is saying, does that display property equal none, or does it equal an empty string? If so, then if one of those two are true, then we want to set it to the display to block. Otherwise, we want to set the display to none. All right, let's talk about your lab 2. Should be able to write code for lab 2 with what you understand now. Draw a sketch of it. Remember, for this to work, you need the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all working together. So we want to add tabs to a page. And there's a bunch of techniques of how to do it, which you're welcome to investigate. I want to actually find tab. Yeah, here we go. This is what I mean by tabs, where you have a series of links at the top. You click on it. Actually, those aren't really links. Those are simply, they can be buttons or whatever. When you click that, you get the information changes and the color changes as well. Notice that London is black because London is a selected tab. When you click on Paris, Paris becomes black because that's a selected. So that's what I mean by tabs. So you're going to redo your assignment that you did for week 1, where you got information about JavaScript, PHP, and Ajax. But you're going to redo it using tabs. So what do you need? You need HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. So what's everything going to look like? Well, your HTML is going to contain all the 3 sections plus the 3 tabs. The 3 tabs could be implemented simply by a paragraph tag, a div tag, a button tag, any number of different things, a link tag. So you could do that, anything that you wanted. But your HTML needs to include all 3 sections. So you're still going to have your JavaScript section. You're still going to have your PHP section. You're still going to have your Ajax section. Now, you're going to use CSS to do, and then you're going to have your 3 links displayed here. I keep saying links, they could be buttons. All right. Now, your CSS has to make sure that these all overlap, because you wouldn't want it if you clicked PHP that PHP would show down here, or if you clicked Ajax, Ajax showed here. You want these 3 sections to overlap, which means they're going to be the same size. All right. At least the same width. All right. And they ought to be positioned on top of each other. And there's a number of different ways you could do that. Now, when you first go to the page, JavaScript should be showing. So just like in our example, when we first went to that tab, London was showing. When we first go to this page, JavaScript should be showing. Then you're going to have events on those links or buttons or whatever that say, when you click on it, you want to show the relevant tab and hide all the rest. So HTML to contain the content, CSS to make sure that the sections are positioned correctly, and JavaScript to show and hide the appropriate item that's clicked on. You're going to have one more thing to do, and that is change the color of the link. If you noticed in our example that I showed you, the selected tab was black. You know which option that you selected. Any questions on this assignment? Make sure you understand functions. I've given some resources in Canvas. All right. What does this mean? Oh, it means I'm not logged on. Okay. I've given a number of resources in the module, the week 2 module. Pointed to the JavaScript tutorial. Spend time reviewing functions. Make sure you have that down and understand the purpose of an argument, the difference between defining a function and calling a function, and how functions allow us to reuse the code, because that's going to be critical as we go forward. It's a very, very basic, very fundamental concept, but my experience is that some students don't 100% grasp it. So make sure that if you need to do additional resource, or if you have, if you need to do additional research and find some other examples, that's cool. Or you can talk to me if you have any questions about it. But that's really critical in doing a good job programming, really in any language. And it will be critical here too, because we don't want to repeat ourselves. We don't want to have sections of code that are very similar to each other. We want to put it into a block of code that's reusable, so on. Any questions? All right, that's all I had for today. We'll either see you in lab or we will see you next week.